The summer of 1882 brought drought and desperation to the Arizona Territory, driving good people to terrible choices and creating markets where human dignity was bought and sold like cattle. But on a scorching August afternoon in the frontier town of Redemption Falls, one lonely rancher's decision to purchase a chained bride would prove that sometimes the most unexpected transactions lead to the deepest transformations. Luke Brennan, had been running the Copper Ridge Ranch alone for 6 years, ever since his parents died in a flash flood and left him their land, their debts, and the crushing responsibility of keeping a failing operation alive through sheer determination. At 37, he had built the ranch into modest success through brutal hard work and careful management, but success without someone to share it with felt hollow as a drum. Luke was a practical man who understood that frontier life required partnerships built on mutual need rather than romantic illusions. He needed a wife who could help run the household, bear children to carry on his legacy, and provide the companionship that made isolation bearable. In return, he would offer protection, provision, and the kind of respect that came from valuing someone's labor rather than just their beauty. But finding a wife in territory where women were scarce and ranchers were many had proven impossible through conventional means, which is why Luke found himself standing in the brutal August sun outside Redemption Falls auction house, watching desperate women being sold to the highest bidder like livestock at market, his conscience warring with his practical needs. The auction was a shameful necessity of frontier life, a place where widows with no means of support, orphaned girls with no family, and women fleeing worse situations voluntarily submitted to being purchased by men who promised something better than starvation or worse. It wasn't slavery, the auctioneer insisted, but practical marriages of convenience where women traded their labor and childbearing capacity for security and provision. Luke hated everything about it. But after 6 years of failed courtships and rejected proposals from women who wanted easier lives than ranch isolation could provide, he was desperate enough to consider purchasing what he couldn't win through courtship. That's when they brought her onto the platform, a young woman who couldn't be more than 25, with dark hair hanging loose around a face that would have been beautiful if not marked by obvious exhaustion and barely concealed terror. She wore a simple dress that had seen better days, and most shockingly, her wrists bore the marks of recent chains, though the iron had been removed before presenting her to potential buyers. The auctioneer's voice carried across the crowd with practiced efficiency. "This here's Abigail Winters, age 24, good health, strong back, knows cooking and sewing. She's been cleared by the doctor and certified ready for childbearing. Starting bid is $50. Luke watched Abigail's face as men shouted their bids, seeing shame and resignation war with desperate hope that whoever bought her would be kinder than whatever circumstances had driven her to this platform. When the bidding reached $200, a sum that represented months of Luke's careful savings, he made a decision that would change both their lives. $500, Luke called out, his deep voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. Cash money right now, and I want those chain marks treated before she leaves this platform. The crowd fell silent at the astronomical sum, and Abigail's eyes found Luke's face across the distance, searching for clues about what kind of man would pay so much for a woman he'd never met. And that's when you realize this isn't just an auction story. It's about two people discovering that sometimes the transactions that look most like ownership turn into the partnerships built on deepest respect, which is exactly why you should hit that subscribe button right now, because watching how this purchased bride and lonely rancher build something beautiful from this shameful beginning will restore your faith in human decency. After the transaction was completed and Abigail's wrists were bandaged by the town doctor, Luke led her to his wagon with careful formality, his manner more respectful than most men showed their purchased wives. He helped her onto the bench seat, giving her space rather than crowding close, and began the 3-hour drive to Copper Ridge Ranch in silence that felt heavy with unspoken questions and fears. Finally, halfway home, Abigail spoke in a voice that trembled despite obvious efforts at control. What do you expect from me, Mr. Brennan? I should know my duties before we arrive. Luke kept his eyes on the trail ahead, choosing his words carefully. I expect you to help run the household, cooking, cleaning, managing supplies. I expect you to work alongside me building this ranch into something worth passing down. And yes, Abigail, I expect you to give me sons to carry on what I'm building. That's why I paid $500 when other men would have gotten you for $200. He paused, then added with surprising gentleness, but I also expect to treat you with respect, to never raise my hand to you in anger, and to make sure you have what you need to be healthy and happy. I didn't buy property, Abigail. I bought a partnership with someone who had no better options. I aim to prove you made the right choice by accepting my bid. Abigail felt tears prick her eyes at his unexpected decency, but she had to be honest about what she couldn't give him. Mr. Brennan, there's something you need to know before we go any further, something the auctioneer didn't tell you because it would have lowered my value. Luke finally looked at her, seeing genuine fear in her expression. What is it? Abigail took a shaking breath, knowing what she had to reveal might change everything. I was married before, for 3 years. My husband divorced me because in all that time I never got pregnant. The doctor said my body, there's something wrong with me. I might never be able to give you children, let alone sons. If you want to take me back and get your money returned, stop, Luke interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. I heard you and I'm not taking you back. We'll deal with what comes or doesn't come. Right now, I need a partner more than I need promises about children that might not happen anyway. But you haven't seen the most important part yet. Abigail stared at him in shock, unable to believe that a man who had just said he wanted sons would be so calm about learning she probably couldn't provide them. You spent $500 expecting children. Don't you feel cheated? Luke was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses around a rocky section of trail. My parents tried for 10 years before I was born. My mother had 5 miscarriages and was told she'd never carry a baby to term. Then one year, against all expectations, she got pregnant with me and I survived. The doctors couldn't explain it. They just called it a miracle. He glanced at Abigail with unexpected warmth in his weathered features. So I learned early that children come when they come, and worrying about it doesn't help. If God means for us to have children, we will. If not, we'll build a good life anyway. Either way, I need someone to share this ranch with, someone to talk to at night, someone to make this house feel like a home instead of just a place where I sleep between work. Can you do that? Abigail felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of shame and fear she'd been carrying since her ex-husband had branded her worthless for her inability to conceive. Yes, she whispered, yes, I can do that. The Copper Ridge Ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy house, productive gardens, and cattle that looked healthy despite the drought. Luke showed Abigail around with quiet pride, explaining his plans for expansion, his hopes for the future, and his practical expectations for their partnership. I sleep in the main bedroom, he said as they toured the house. You'll have the smaller room and lessen until you decide you're comfortable sharing. I won't force the issue, Abigail. When and if we share a bed, it'll be because you choose it, not because I demand my rights as your husband. The unexpected courtesy made Abigail's eyes fill with tears. Her first husband had been brutal in his demands, blaming her for his frustration when pregnancy didn't result from his violence. The idea that this man would give her choice and time felt like stepping into sunlight after years in darkness. Wait, don't miss what happens next. The first weeks of their arrangement fell into comfortable rhythms as Abigail learned the ranch's routines, and Luke discovered that he'd gotten far more than he'd bargained for. Abigail wasn't just competent, she was brilliant at organization and efficiency, transforming his chaotic household into a smoothly running operation. She reorganized his kitchen so everything was accessible, implemented a system for tracking supplies and expenses that saved money he didn't know he was wasting, and turned his wild vegetable garden into productive rows that would feed them through winter. More importantly, she brought life to the lonely house with her singing while she worked, her laughter at his dry humor, and her genuine interest in his plans for the ranch's future. Luke found himself looking forward to evenings on the porch where they'd sit together watching the sunset, sharing stories about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Abigail told him about growing up in Boston, how her father had lost everything in bad investments and married her off to the first man who'd take her without dowry, how that man had blamed her for his own inadequacies until the shame had nearly broken her spirit. "When he divorced me, I had nothing and nowhere to go," Abigail explained one evening as they shelled peas together. "The auction was my last option. Better to be sold to a stranger who might be kind than starve on the streets or worse. I was terrified you'd be cruel, that you'd blame me like he did when children didn't come." Luke set down his work to look at her directly. "Abigail, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say. Your worth isn't measured by your ability to bear children. You're valuable because you're intelligent, hardworking, kind, and you've made this ranch run better in 6 weeks than I managed in 6 years. If we never have children, I'll still consider getting you at that auction the best investment I ever made." The words broke through Abigail's carefully maintained emotional barriers, and she found herself crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being valued for who she was rather than what her body could or couldn't do. Luke pulled her into an awkward embrace, his large hands patting her back with the same careful gentleness he used with skittish horses. "It's all right. You're safe here, Abigail. You're valued here. And you're never going back to being treated like you're worthless. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what comes next." As summer turned to autumn, the relationship between Luke and Abigail evolved from careful courtesy into genuine affection. They worked side by side during harvest, celebrated small victories together, and gradually began sharing the kind of intimate conversation that suggested their partnership was becoming something deeper. The shift happened naturally one evening when Abigail knocked on Luke's bedroom door with unexpected boldness. When he opened it, she stood in her nightgown with determination written across her features. "I want to share your bed," she said quietly. "Not because I think I should, not because you've demanded it, but because I want to. You've shown me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness, and I want to be your wife in all ways, not just in name." Luke studied her face carefully, making sure this was truly her choice. "Abigail, you know there's a good chance this won't result in pregnancy. Are you prepared for that disappointment?" "I'm prepared for whatever happens," Abigail replied, "but I've realized something these past months. You married me expecting sons, and you got a partner instead. Maybe that's what I was meant to give you, not children born from my body, but a life built from our partnership. And if God decides to surprise us like he surprised your parents, we'll be grateful. Either way, I want to be your wife completely." Their union that night was tender and patient, Luke taking time to show Abigail what intimacy could be when it was built on respect rather than demand. For the first time in her life, Abigail understood that her body could be a source of joy rather than shame, and that love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. The months passed with contentment, if not conception. Abigail's monthly courses came and went with regularity that should have brought disappointment, but somehow didn't. Both of them had discovered that their partnership brought satisfaction that didn't depend on children, though neither had given up hope entirely. Then, in the spring of their second year together, something unexpected happened. Abigail woke one morning feeling nauseated for the third day in a row. She dismissed it as bad food until she realized her monthly course was 2 weeks late. Hope and fear warred in her chest as she rode to town to see the doctor, not telling Luke because she couldn't bear to disappoint him if this was nothing. The doctor's examination confirmed what she barely dared believe. She was pregnant, approximately 3 months along, and showing every sign of a healthy pregnancy that might actually reach full term. When Abigail returned to the ranch, she found Luke in the barn repairing tack. She stood in the doorway watching him work, trying to find words for what she needed to say. "Luke," she finally managed, her voice shaking, "remember how you said if God meant for us to have children, we would—" Luke looked up, something in her tone making him set down his work and give her his full attention. "Yes?" I think God decided to surprise us like he surprised your parents, Abigail said, tears streaming down her face. I'm pregnant, Luke. The doctor says I'm 3 months along and everything looks healthy. Luke crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms with a joy so profound it made him shake. Are you sure? Is this real? It's real, Abigail sobbed against his chest. I don't know why it's happening now when it didn't before, but it's real. We're going to have a baby. They stood together in the barn, 2 people who had come together through shameful transaction and built something beautiful through mutual respect and growing love. Now blessed with the child neither had truly expected, but both had quietly hoped for. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in November, Abigail gave birth to a healthy son they named Samuel, after Luke's father. As Luke held his newborn child with hands that trembled with emotion, he looked at Abigail with wonder. I bought you at an auction expecting you to give me sons, he said softly. But you gave me something far more valuable first. You gave me partnership, companionship, and love. Samuel's a blessing, but you were the miracle that made everything else possible. Abigail smiled through her exhaustion. You saved me from that platform and gave me dignity when I thought I'd never have it again. You valued me when I was valueless, and you loved me when I thought I was unlovable. Samuel's our blessing, but you were mine. Years passed, and the Copper Ridge Ranch flourished under their joint management. Samuel grew strong and healthy, and against all medical predictions, Abigail bore 3 more children, 2 more sons, and finally a daughter who inherited her mother's determination and her father's kindness. Luke never forgot how their marriage began, and he made sure his children understood that their mother's worth had never been measured by her ability to bear them. He taught them that dignity came from respecting others regardless of circumstances, that love could grow in the most unlikely places, and that the best partnerships were built on valuing people for who they were, rather than what they could provide. On their 20th anniversary, as they watched their children working together in the fields, Abigail reflected on the day she'd stood on that auction platform in chains. Do you ever think about that day? She asked Luke. Every day, Luke replied, because that was the day I made the best business decision of my life, investing in a partner who turned out to be worth 100 times what I paid. You weren't just a bride purchased at auction, Abigail. You were the missing piece that made everything else possible. You said I'd give you sons, Abigail reminded him with a smile. And I did, eventually. But first I gave you something better. What's that? Luke asked. A reason to stop measuring worth by what people can produce and start measuring it by who they are, Abigail said. You taught me that I wasn't worthless just because my body didn't work the way it should. And I taught you that the best investments are the ones made in people's dignity rather than their utility. They kissed, as the sun set over the ranch they'd built together, 2 people who had come together through shameful transaction and built something beautiful through mutual respect, patient love, and the courage to value each other's humanity over their utility. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity matters more than circumstances, and that love can transform the most shameful beginnings into the most beautiful partnerships, then you've found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Romance Stories for more tales of redemption, respect, and love that sees past transactions to the human hearts beneath. From auction platforms to family homesteads, every story we tell proves that the deepest love grows when people are valued for who they are, rather than what they can provide. This is where purchased brides become beloved partners, where lonely ranchers learn to measure worth by character rather than utility, and where love proves that dignity is never for sale, it's recognized in others and given freely.